let's try and make sense of something that, on the surface, is just completely baffling. We've got a high-level ceasefire between the United States and Iran. At the exact same time, there's a brutal, escalating war between Israel and Hezbollah happening in Lebanon.
So that lands us right at the central question, the one that kind of breaks your brain. How is this even possible? How can these two things, a major peace agreement and a raging war, be happening in the same region at the same time?
And here it is, laid out plain and simple. You've got this global agreement, a real diplomatic success story, but then you look at the local reality, and it's just the opposite. Daily attacks, escalating violence. It's a total jarring disconnect.
Okay, so to untangle all this, here's how we're going to do it. We'll start with the paradox itself. Then we'll dig into this idea of two wars happening in one region. We'll look at the roots of why they're so divided, face the very real human cost, and finally wrap up with why this dangerous disconnect is so important to understand.
Right. So here's the absolute key to understanding everything. We are not watching one single war. We're actually watching at least two, and they're running on parallel tracks. Once you get that separation, the whole puzzle starts to make sense.
And that brings us to this term, parallel conflicts. These are not just little side battles. No, they're completely distinct wars. They have their own histories, their own goals, their own reasons for fighting. The US-Iran ceasefire, well, it was only built to stop their fight, not these other separate conflicts.
You know, I think this analogy is perfect. Imagine the big US-Iran conflict as the trunk of a tree. Now, the Israel-Hezbollah war is a huge, thick branch coming off of it. It's definitely connected, for sure. But here's the thing. That branch has grown its own massive root system deep into the local soil. So even if you chop down the main trunk, that branch can keep on living.
And you can see just how different they are. The parent war between the US and Iran, that was a high-tech fight in the air and at sea. It was all about nuclear sites and controlling massive shipping lanes. But the local war, totally different. That's a brutal ground and air fight right on the Lebanese border, and its roots go back for decades, long before this current crisis kicked off.
So this gets us to the real heart of it. Let's look at the roots of this divide. Why specifically does this huge ceasefire not stop a single bullet from being fired on the ground in Lebanon?
Well, it really boils down to three big reasons. First, you've got Hezbollah acting on its own. Second, Israel has its own, very separate set of goals here. And third, the things motivating the big players to make peace just don't apply in the same way to the people doing the fighting.
This is so important to grasp. Hezbollah isn't just a puppet taking orders from Iran. Yes, it's a powerful ally, but it's also a massive Lebanese political party with its own military. It has its own people to answer to. So it's making its own strategic decisions based on its own local realities, not just what Tehran wants.
And then you flip over to the other side, and Israel has a completely different agenda. For decades, Israel has seen Hezbollah as one of its biggest threats. So from their point of view, with Iran tied up in ceasefire talks, well, this is a golden opportunity to try and weaken Hezbollah, an objective that has absolutely nothing to do with the wider US-Iran conflict.
And this is where it all diverges. You see, the US and Iran had these huge pressures on them. The US needed to calm down global energy markets. Iran needed the attacks on its nuclear program to stop. Those massive economic and strategic forces pushed them to the negotiating table. But those pressures, they just don't mean much to the fighters on the ground in southern Lebanon.
And while all these geopolitical games are being played out, we absolutely have to talk about the devastating human cost. Because this is not just some abstract theory. It's a horrific reality for people living in Lebanon right now.
Just let that number sink in. Over 2,000 people killed in just a few short weeks. More than 160 of them were children. This is the real price of this fractured, incomplete peace.
And look at the sheer scale of the chaos. 500,000 civilians told to leave their homes. That's 500,000 people whose lives have been completely turned upside down. A massive humanitarian crisis that's unfolding while diplomats somewhere else are talking about a ceasefire.
The destruction is just immense. We're talking about constant airstrikes, heavy artillery, reports of phosphorus shelling. Entire neighborhoods are being turned into rubble. Critical infrastructure is being destroyed. And the hospitals, they are completely, utterly overwhelmed.
So let's zoom out for a second, because this dangerous disconnect, it isn't a new thing. This is a pattern we have seen again and again throughout history. And if you understand the pattern, you understand a lot about modern war.
I mean, think back to the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union, They managed to avoid ever fighting each other directly. But what happened? Their local allies and proxies fought some of the most brutal wars imaginable, in Korea, in Vietnam, in Afghanistan. The big superpower agreement to avoid nuclear Armageddon did absolutely nothing to save millions of lives in those local fights.
This creates something called a vacuum of accountability. Basically, the high-level ceasefire gives political cover to both the US and Iran. They can stand back and say, hey, we're working on peace, while at the same time their local allies have the freedom to go all out to pursue their own military goals with zero consequences.
And this quote just nails the sheer absurdity of it all. It's like these two CEOs are in a nice, clean conference room shaking hands on a deal, and they're completely ignoring the fact that the factory floor below them is on fire.
Honestly, I think this is the most chillingly accurate way to describe it. The ceasefire treated a symptom, the direct US-Iran attacks. It was like giving a patient an aspirin for a headache. But it completely ignored the fatal wound, the raging local conflict, which is like massive internal bleeding. And if you only treat the headache, the patient still dies.
And so that's the question I want to leave you with, because it's what this whole situation forces us to ask. Can any peace deal actually work if it only pays attention to the big headline conflict? History, and right now the people of Lebanon, are giving us a very clear and a very painful answer.